Okay, so I'm hoping everybody can see it now says remote working and selling roundtable.
It does.
Yep, definitely.
Okay, good. Okay, thank you everybody for your time. So just like to introduce myself. So I'm Mark Savinson, the CEO of Strategy to Revenue. In your own time, you can read the descriptions a colleague very kindly put about me. I'd also like to introduce Ginny. Ginny and I have had fun over the last week and a half since we started saying we were going to do this, because Ginny has successfully explained a whole load of things that I do, why I do them, so at least I'm now consciously competent, as opposed to being previously unconsciously competent. Ginny, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, actually, I quite like what Mark's friend wrote. Human behavior is very interesting. We're at a completely unprecedented time, and more than ever before, you're going to start to see people defaulting to type and behaving in particular ways. And a lot of that is because of how we've been programmed by culture and evolution. I love that. Yeah, it is just science. We are programmed, and this is really to, that's my background. That's what I do as a living, whether it's helping sales organizations change or do stuff like that. But once you start to point it out, as Mark will say, you do all these things naturally anyway, you just don't know why. And all I'm going to do is give you the why behind how you do them. And like that very first sales call, when you all were told why you were doing what you were doing, when some sales manager was watching you, it's the same thing. You'll all go away and go, get it now. It's not complicated. And I don't think it's scary, but hey.
So what we're going to do, and we're going to be a bit different. I'm sure a number of you have gone on various webinars that are going straight to how do we sell remotely, or how do we work remotely. But in the conversations that Ginny and I have had, what became clear is that we wanted to explain to people what was going on with your staff, what was actually going through their heads, and then take you on the start of the journey to say, how do we start to deal with that? And how do we start to make what we're calling the cultural shift to get ready for people to start A, working remotely, and B, selling remotely. Now, some of you may already be saying, well, I've got people who already work remotely. And that's true. But what we want to highlight is even for them, there's a big change that's going on. And these are changes you will probably have seen. You will probably have noticed that some of the conversations with your people aren't the same as normal. And it's important we all understand why. Because if we understand why, we can actually deal with it and then support our people to what is our current normal, bits of which will become our new normal. The other thing as we're going along, you will notice with Ginny and I, we have one thing in common. We do have a tendency to want to talk. So feel free to interrupt, ask questions. The idea is this is a round table. We've got some thoughts we want to give over, but we want to hear from you as well. So every so often, Ginny and I will interfere with each other's statements and say, hold on a minute, does anybody else have something to say? But if you have something to say, please just jump in and we'll make this as interactive as possible. So what we want to do is make sure you understand what's going on in people's minds, and then start to understand the role of corporate culture, the things you have to put in place before you actually start telling everybody, by the way, guys, you're now working remotely, working from home, however you want to describe this. You're now selling remotely, selling from home. There are things that need to be put in place to make that effective. So it's just not a phrase, or worse, it's not, here's a copy of Microsoft Teams or Zoom, here's a video that says, stare at the camera, talk to the camera, don't look down, don't look away, now go for it. There are other things going on in our psyche, and we need to make sure we understand that, put it in place to make our people actually have a chance of being effective as we move forward. So we want to start to help you to build a culture plan. This is the first of a number of these. We'll keep building on them. We'll keep sharing our experiences. And from an experience point of view, it's worthwhile for you to understand. I've been running a business that has been remote for the last 7 years. I've actually been working from home for 14 years. So I have a team of people who are used to they have proper home offices. So they don't have ironing boards. that they've put their laptop on. They're all geared up, but even they are struggling with what's going on, which is why the conversations I had with Ginny are so important. So I'm going to hand over to Ginny, who's going to explain what it is we're experiencing.
Right. What we're going through at the moment is unprecedented in our generation, and perhaps, and all the generations below us. The last generation who went through a huge traumatic change with the people who lived through the Second World War and some of its aftermath. Traumatic change means a number of things. So you're at the threat of losing what are the 4 basic needs, which is safety, food, shelter, and warmth. And this hits people at such a basic level that they then start to question a load of other things about what's happening in their world. Because for as long as we can remember, we never had to worry really in our world about, am I safe? Do I have enough food? Am I sheltered? Am I warm? So what's happening now, people are starting to get really quite fearful about what is happening out there. And there's nothing you can do to stop it. You have something which is basically right at the back here and probably in and up by about ½ an inch to an inch, called the amygdala. And you've heard of fight or flight. But there's another thing the amygdala does, which is it scans the environment every 5 seconds for something it can't predict. And at the moment, it's absolutely losing the plot because all of the things you used to be able to predict aren't there. And one of the things it falls really significantly into are the things that people do every day that say something to them about, I know, we all know, this is what we do. Now, they're called anchors, and they reinforce your own reality and how we understand how we all trust each other to do things. So, for example, someone was explaining to me the other day how she got to the station every day, and although she never knew the name of the person who gave her coffee, it happened every day. It was always there waiting for her. She picked it up, they said hello, they exchanged, she got on. And that's a really good instance of one of those, I know, we all know together. All of those things have started to fall apart because all of those things we do about social cohesion have disappeared when we're in lockdown. So the amygdala system is going completely crazy. It will always ask the worst scenario because it only knows, do I run? Do I fight? It asks our higher cortex to look for that in the environment. And what the higher cortex does is go, what's still the same? Oh no, there's nothing still the same. So the amygdala is sitting there going, ah! And it doesn't matter how much logic you ever think or talk to people, it's what their base process is at the moment. The only people who will be able to have a good process through this at the moment is anyone you know who's been through traumatic change. And that would be the death of a spouse or being threatened by an illness that could kill you within the next 6 to 8 months. Those are the people who have some idea about this. So that's just a very brief overview. Mark?
So thank you, Ginny. So what I want you to realize is that there's a lot of us that are going out there and going, well, actually, the only change is we're asking people who were working in their office to now work from home. But what we have to realize is actually this traumatic change is overriding that. It's not our typical business change program. It's not a change in the working environment. It's the change in life. It's the change in our reality. And again, that's why I know in my team, I'm watching people who typically are happy to work from home, who've been remote selling, and they're just not very productive at the moment because it's got nothing to do with the work environment. And we have to realize that as we're starting to help people come to terms with this, that our first job is to help them come to terms with it. And there are things in there that we have, that we use every day that define what we think is normal. And as Ginny has explained to me, these normals, whoops. Oh dear. These normals are driven by us because we have to find a way of dealing with fear. So what Ginny has described is fear. And I want you to think about this and think about the people you're dealing with. Many of you may have come across models for dealing with change. There's a model that we use, which is known as DRAC, which is how you deal with change or how you deal with receiving feedback. where you go through an equivalent to this, but there are some big changes. These are the steps you go through when you've lost somebody.
Yes. It's a grief process, and I asked Mark to use this one because in the conversations I've had and what I've seen across social media, and it's affecting people at such a level. And you don't just have to grieve for a person. You can grieve, and lots of people grieve for a lost future, and people also grieve over the fact that they've lost control. So it's a major loss on those base things, and it's control. It's a future at the moment because they don't know where it's going to stop. They don't know how long they're on this journey. It's a bit like being in a tunnel in the dark. Mark.
Yeah, so what we're seeing is, and you will see it in yourself and in your people. First of all, we go through every step, regardless of how well you cope. The difference is how quickly we go through the steps. But we all at some point have denial, whether that's denial over the virus or denial about this new reality is going to impact me. We go through denial. We then get angry and we go, why is this happening? It's not fair. And then this is the interesting bit, which is different to where I would typically deal with change, which Ginny's helped me understand. And it's called bargaining, which is, I may be accepting that something's got to change, but it's not my problem. Somebody else will deal with it. I think of that in a work environment. We are used to, in many cases, work dealing with it, work telling me what I've got to do. But during grief, I have to internalize it. I have to own it. So this bargaining stage during grief, that's when those people that you know have religion turn to God and they pray to God for help and say, why is this happening to me? Or we all went through it in the UK prior to Monday. Come on, government, deal with it. Government, you've got to deal with it because we weren't dealing with it. So we go through this bargaining stage. But then we have to reach a point where we realize, you know what, the only person who can make this work is me. So what happens? I get depressed because all of a sudden I've got nobody to rely on. I can't deal, I can't ask the government to keep me inside because even though they'll lay down the law, I've got to do it. We're being threatened with fines if we go out, but I still have to do with it. It's happening to me and I must deal with it. And I will go through a period of depression. When I come out of it, I will accept it and I can move on. And the phrase that I've been trying to use with a lot of people is move on, as in don't look back. Don't go back and say, oh, do you remember when I went into the office? Because then you'll revisit this. You have to get everybody to say, this is our reality. I'm a somewhat strange individual. When my father died, and people would say to me, and this is going to sound really crass, and I apologize, but it explains how people deal with it. I'm really sorry that you lost your father. To which I would regularly reply, I didn't lose him. I know exactly which plot he's in. My father died. I can accept my father died. You're having the problem of dealing with the fact that my father died and you're trying to water it down for me. I'd accepted it. And this is part of what we have to learn how we deal with people. We will all accept it in a different way. And sometimes, as I would do, they create a new anger in me when they try and hide the fact of what has happened. And we're hearing that a lot. So, Ginny, is there anything you'd like to add?
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
Jenny.
And it's the psychology end of this. I've used the term siege mentality occasionally, where people get in a huddle and start working together when they haven't done it. So I'll give you an example. We live in a street with, 20 houses, and we've acknowledged the neighbours before. Some of us have got dogs, a lot of us go for exercise. All of a sudden, the conversations are flowing much more easy and creating almost a cooperative or a collaborative.
Yes.
Where does that sort of behaviour sit in that illustration?
Okay, there's a very particular... So this is an individual approach. There are also crowd and social approaches. What happens when a group of people who usually don't work together, and you could just loosely know each other, and to be fair, sometimes that's a lot of businesses as well. It's called there's a concept called a superordinate need, as in we now all have to work together to survive. So it switches on in the brains things we haven't used since we were probably pre-industrial, where you had very small villages who all helped each other out all of the time. The further we've got away from the fact that we all have to work together, the more we've been individuals. So what you're seeing now is there's a greater threat to us, and we now realize, or our brains realize, that we have to work together to survive. That threat's called a superordinate need. It threatens all of us, all the same, all at the same time. And all you're seeing is a resurgence of cooperative behaviors. And these are actually hardwired into our brains. One of the fundamental reasons human beings evolved faster and quicker than anyone else is we actually have shared cooperation right down at the bottom of our evolutionary pyramid. We didn't survive without, let's say, 10 people going out to hunt to kill a mammoth feeds a whole village. And I know that sounds weird, but it is actually hardwired in your DNA. So, quick summary, if you're all of those 4 things we talked about at the beginning: warmth, looking after each other, so warmth, safety, the base of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If any of those are threatened by a global thing, you will come together more. The other thing I would say is that's also about physical closeness. Because you're in the street, that will happen there. One of the things we need to do is be able to foster that when we just work at a distance. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, I was just intrigued from the psychology perspective. I mean, you've just translated it to the next stage, which is right. How does that then play out in the business world? Can you foster it and expand on it? Yeah.
Yeah, I was trying to make a nice link for Mark. But it's really interesting. If you're ever interested in some of the science background from that, inbox me and I'll send you the work. But it's amazing how quickly that happens. And it's because you are physically hardwired to behave like that.
Okay, cool. Thank you.